Exodus 1. The Israelites oppressed the sons of Israel who migrated to Egypt with Jacob included Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. The entire family, including Jacob's descendants, numbered 70, excluding Joseph, who was already in Egypt. As time passed, Joseph, his brothers, and their generation died. However, the Israelites thrived, becoming exceedingly numerous, populating the land abundantly. A new Egyptian king, who was unaware of Joseph's contributions, emerged. Observing the burgeoning Israelite population, he feared their potential alliance with enemies during wartime, which could threaten Egypt's stability. To curb their growth, the Pharaoh subjected the Israelites to harsh slavery, enforcing labor as they built the cities of Pithom and Ramesses. Despite increased oppression, the Israelites continued to multiply, intensifying the Egyptians' dread. The Egyptians intensified their ruthless treatment, making the Israelites' lives bitter with difficult labor in brick, mortar, and fieldwork. In a more drastic measure, the Pharaoh commanded Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, to kill newborn Hebrew boys but let the girls live. However, the midwives, revering God, defied the command, sparing the boys. When questioned by Pharaoh, they cleverly explained that Hebrew women gave birth before their arrival. God favored the midwives for their fear of him, blessing them with families. Frustrated, Pharaoh ordered his people to throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the Nile, sparing the girls, in a desperate attempt to control the population. Exodus 2. The birth of Moses. A Levite man married a Levite woman, and they had a son. Seeing that he was a fine child, his mother hid him for 3 months. When hiding him became impossible, she placed him in a tar and pitch-coated papyrus basket and set it among the reeds of the Nile. The child's sister watched from a distance to see what would happen. One day, Pharaoh's daughter came to bathe in the Nile, noticed the basket, and sent her slave to retrieve it. Opening it, she found the crying baby, recognized him as Hebrew, and felt compassion for him. Moses' sister offered to find a Hebrew woman to nurse the baby, to which Pharaoh's daughter agreed. She brought the child's mother, who was then paid to nurse him. Once the child grew older, his mother brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who named him Moses, stating, "I drew him out of the water." Moses flees to Midian. As an adult, Moses witnessed the burdens of his people and saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. After ensuring no one was watching, Moses killed the Egyptian and buried him in the sand. The next day, he confronted 2 fighting Hebrews, asking the aggressor why he hit a fellow Hebrew. The man retorted, questioning Moses' authority and mentioning the murder of the Egyptian, making Moses realize his deed was known. Pharaoh, upon hearing, sought to kill Moses, who fled to Midian. There he sat by a well. The priest of Midian's 7 daughters came to draw water for their flock, but were driven away by shepherds. Moses intervened and watered their flock. When the daughters returned to Reuel, their father, and explained the early return and the Egyptian man's assistance, Reuel invited Moses for a meal. Moses stayed with Reuel, who later gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. She bore a son, and Moses named him Gershom, expressing his experience as a foreigner. God's concern for the Israelites. During a long period, the Egyptian king died, and the Israelites suffered greatly, crying out from their slavery. God heard their pleas, remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and took notice of their plight, preparing to act on their behalf. Exodus 3. Moses and the burning bush. While tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law Moses led them to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames from within a bush. The bush was ablaze, yet it was not consumed by the fire. Intrigued, Moses approached to understand this sight. As he drew near, God called out to him from the bush, "Moses, Moses!" Moses replied, "Here I am." God instructed him not to come any closer and to remove his sandals, as he was on holy ground. Identifying himself, God said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Overwhelmed with reverence, Moses hid his face in fear. God revealed he had seen the suffering of his people in Egypt and heard their cries. He planned to rescue them from Egyptian hands and lead them to a land flowing with milk and honey, the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. God commanded Moses to go to Pharaoh to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. Moses questioned his own ability to undertake this mission. God reassured him of his presence and promised, as a sign, that Moses would worship God on that mountain after delivering the Israelites. Moses then asked what name he should present to the Israelites when asked who sent him. God responded, "I am who I am," directing Moses to say, "I am has sent me to you." Furthermore, God instructed him to announce the Lord as the God of their forefathers, a name to be remembered forever. God further instructed Moses to gather Israelite elders and relay God's message. He had witnessed their plight in Egypt and promised deliverance to a fruitful land. The elders would heed Moses, and together they must request Pharaoh to allow a 3-day journey into the wilderness for worship. However, God warned that Pharaoh would resist, prompting God to unleash wonders upon Egypt, compelling him to relent. God promised to make the Egyptians favorably disposed to the Israelites, ensuring they would not leave empty-handed. Women were to ask their Egyptian neighbors for silver, gold, and clothing, thus plundering the Egyptians. Exodus 4. Signs for Moses. Moses expressed concern to God about the Israelites potentially doubting his encounter with the Lord. In response, God provided signs to authenticate Moses' divine mission. First, God turned Moses' staff into a snake and then back into a staff after instructing him to grab its tail. This was to prove to the people that God had indeed appeared to Moses. As a second sign, God made Moses' hand leprous when placed in his cloak and then restored it. If the Israelites still doubted, God instructed Moses to pour Nile water on the ground, which would turn into blood. Despite these assurances, Moses hesitated, citing his lack of eloquence. God reassured him, emphasizing his role in human abilities and promising to help him speak. Yet Moses pleaded for someone else to be sent. God, angered by Moses' reluctance, designated Aaron, his brother, as his spokesperson. God promised to guide both in their speech and actions, with Aaron conveying Moses' messages to the people. Moses was to carry the staff to perform the signs. Moses returns to Egypt. Moses returned to Jethro, sought permission to visit his people in Egypt, and received Jethro's blessing. In Midian, God informed Moses that his enemies in Egypt were dead. Moses then took his family and set out for Egypt, equipped with God's staff. God instructed Moses to perform the wonders before Pharaoh, and warned that he would harden Pharaoh's heart, predicting reluctance to release the Israelites. God also conveyed a stern message for Pharaoh. Israel is his firstborn, and failing to release them would result in the death of Pharaoh's firstborn. During the journey, God confronted Moses at a lodging place, threatening his life. Zipporah, realizing the urgency, circumcised their son and touched Moses' feet with the foreskin, referring to him as a bridegroom of blood, signifying the ritual's significance. God instructed Aaron to meet Moses in the wilderness. Reunited, Moses briefed Aaron on God's messages and signs. Together they convened Israel's elders. Aaron conveyed God's messages, and Moses performed the signs, gaining the people's belief. Acknowledging God's concern for their plight, the Israelites bowed and worshipped. Exodus 5. Bricks without straw. Moses and Aaron approached Pharaoh with a message from the Lord, the God of Israel. requesting that Pharaoh let the Israelites go to hold a festival in the wilderness. Pharaoh rejected this, questioning the identity and authority of the Lord, and refused to let Israel go. Moses and Aaron emphasized their meeting with the God of the Hebrews and the need for a 3-day journey to offer sacrifices, warning of potential plagues or sword if denied. Pharaoh, dismissive, accused them of distracting the people from their work, and retorted that the Israelites were too numerous and should return to their labor. Pharaoh then commanded the slave drivers and overseers not to supply straw for brickmaking, forcing the Israelites to gather straw themselves while maintaining the full quota. He saw their request to worship as laziness and sought to increase their workload to prevent them from being swayed by lies. The overseers informed the Israelites of Pharaoh's harsh decree. Consequently, the people scattered throughout Egypt to collect stubble. Under relentless pressure to meet quotas, the Israelite overseers were beaten for failing to produce sufficient bricks. The overseers appealed to Pharaoh, describing the hardship caused by the lack of straw. Pharaoh labeled them lazy, reiterating that their desire to worship was an excuse to avoid work, and commanded them to meet their quotas without straw. Realizing the severity of their situation, the overseers met Moses and Aaron, angered that their condition had worsened since the requests to Pharaoh. They accused Moses and Aaron of worsening relations, putting their lives at risk. God promises deliverance. Confounded, Moses returned to the Lord, questioning the purpose of his mission since it resulted only in increased suffering for the Israelites. Moses expressed his frustration that instead of deliverance, the situation had deteriorated.